addiction, prevention, recovery.
Welcome to the Recovery Rebirth podcast.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Recovery Rebirth podcast. I'm Dominic.
And I'm Jillian.
Welcome, audience, to this episode where we're talking about sponsorship, accountability partners, and recovery coaches. So the topic is going to talk about a little 12-step type recovery stuff, which is based on sponsorship. Accountability partners works in with folks who maybe do smart recovery or some of these other programs. There's lots of recovery programs out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And recovery coaches is another specific accountability partner. Recovery coach, helps you get connected to resources. We'll talk more about that as we proceed with the episode. But I'd like to share some info from a guy by the name of Dr. David Kelly.
Okay.
John Kelly, not David Kelly. John Kelly.
Okay.
He is out of Harvard and has done research, long-term research, on 12-step treatment. Specifically, he looked at Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's got some data that shows a substantial increase in a person's recovery when they do 12-step type recovery. So this is like a big win for 12-step people.
Yeah.
It's a huge win because it proves that recovery program actually works. There's evidence.
Yes.
They compared, the cost effectiveness and the mechanisms that 12-step recovery work through, and comparing it to therapeutic mechanisms and professional treatments and so forth, and they found that 12-step recovery does work. Well, isn't that a big win? So 12-step recovery is based on sponsorship and accountability partner.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what your thoughts are on sponsorship and accountability partners, Jillian.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about this recovery coach. I mean, I've heard of the term, but I'm interested in you explaining that further a bit later on. So I have been fortunate early on and it was a 12-step program where I started my recovery. I think it was actually my very first meeting where I met the person who would become my sponsor. She wasn't my initial sponsor, but and that was just mid-December 2014, and I was pretty fragile at that time. Mm-hmm. I was in a reconciliation period with my ex-fiance who was struggling with alcoholism, and I was struggling with his alcoholism more than he was, I think. So I was grateful to find a place where I could hear others share their, as we say, experience, strength, and hope, to just know I wasn't alone in all of this, because you can feel very alone, I'm sure, regardless of the recovery program you're in. So I remember this sweet lady sitting at the end of the table, and she just was like this beacon of hope. And at the end of the meeting, she bought me like kind of their book. Every program kind of has it. AA has a big book. This particular program had their own book. So I didn't have any money at the time, so she bought the book. I promptly repaid her because I don't like owing people money. But it was nice that I didn't leave empty-handed. And she did eventually become my sponsor and is my current sponsor. So she's kind of like, I think of her as an older sister. She has been married to 3 alcoholics. And then her final husband having very long-term recovery. So they both together, recovery is at the center of their relationship. And she was there through like my darkest hour, during my dark night of the soul, so to speak. And when my brother passed away, and during some very difficult times. And then I got involved in another recovery program. Was it like summer of 2019? And I kind of dabbled, but got more heavily involved during the pandemic. And the nice thing about the pandemic for me is that it opened up so many more options for meetings because of all the online meetings. And I actually met my sponsor for that program through an online forum, and she lives in Calgary, Canada. But that hasn't prevented The physical distance and lack of meeting her in person has not prevented me from getting some great recovery support for her. And side note, she happens to be like her day job is she's a therapist because my higher power is amazing. So she's done like some free hypnotherapy stuff for me. And so I'm in a pretty good, I don't check in with her as much because I'm not as acute. For me, I tend to, I can't speak to everyone else, but I definitely check in more when I'm more acute with whether it's my codependency or my other issues, my relational issues. But it's been, and I'm going to confess something here. So everybody works their program different. I haven't gotten all the way through the 12 steps with either sponsor, but I do have another person in recovery friend. She and I are talking about working them together. So that to me is like an accountability partner.
But you've always had an accountability partner.
In a sense, I mean, through my sponsor, I've had somebody, and I'm really good at telling on myself, like in my the relationship program. I mean, I can mention the two programs I do. This is non-endorsement to anyone. This is what I've done for me. The two 12-step programs I've participated in are Al-Anon and then SLAA, which is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. So even though I don't have any substance use issues, I've got plenty of issues that I, two 12-step programs to help support me in my recovery.
Sure. And by the way, many people, I understand, go to more than one program.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple programs out there, and maybe you need more than one. And maybe you need a combination of 12-step recovery, and you need a combination with therapy.
Exactly. Or yes. Yep. And I still do some therapy. But for me personally, as you know, if you listen to this podcast long enough, and I know like I have found the most healing through this kind of recovery, through like working with the sponsor, through that shared experience with other people who have been through like struggling with codependency or these relationship issues. But I'm excited to be working with this new person to work the full 12 steps in SLA as an accountability partner. So we're neither, and it's not really a hierarchy. I think that's important for people to know. Like sponsorship is not a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
There is no hierarchy in 12-step programs. We're simply like, fellow travelers supporting each other in this recovery process. But sponsorship is invaluable for me. I've had the opportunity to sponsor a little bit, and then those, and I'm sure this happens a lot. Like I had women that were interested, and then they would kind of fade out, and then, but at some point maybe I'll have a longer term relationship as a sponsor, but it's never a hierarchy. It's just two people supporting each other in their recovery process.
Exactly. The long-term relationship piece is what the scientific proof that 12-step recovery works is because of the long-term relationship that you have and the ongoing reinforcement that you have that comes from 12-step recovery. As opposed to a clinical type treatment that often ends, it ends at some point. You don't have the follow up, and that's one of my pet peeves. I could do a whole thing on why don't we treat addiction like the disease that it is. I mean, we'll be talking about that in a future podcast when I talk about
I smell a future episode.
Yeah, implicit bias and as it relates to addiction, and we get treated like those people, and you don't get the ongoing treatment. But the scientific studies showed that with the long-term treatment that you get with 12-step recovery, because it's a process that continues throughout your life.
Yes.
That's what is the win. That's the win for everybody, and it builds recovery capital, which I will talk about a bit. But what is recovery really? Recovery is different for every person. You brought up so much in when you were sharing about your personal experience and with two different programs. What really is recovery, and how is it defined?
Right.
And that's part of the problem, or challenge at least, for professionals in the business, because the recovery coach community talks about an improved quality of life.
Okay.
That's what the recovery coach community is. And I personally add on to that an improved quality of life that is sustained over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't specify what period of time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to judge somebody's recovery who's got 6 months versus 6 years,
Right.
because the person with 6 years may still have more issues to deal with, and the person with 6 months may be on a straight-up trajectory of an improved quality of life with 6 months.
Right.
So there is no time clock or calendar running, really, which kind of keeps us all on a level playing field, because it's not like, well, I've got 10 years and you've only got, 2 or whatever. It doesn't work that way. It's an improved quality of life over a sustained period of time.
Yeah, and I can say from my own experience, I mean, I've had those periods where I've had like tremendous growth in kind of a short period of time, and then kind of plateau for a bit, and just, ebbs and flows. But the goal is like forward movement, and I've said sometimes even if it's just a crawl, and it's easier to sustain that when you have some support through a sponsor or accountability partner. Another thing that I would like to say, plug for this method, and I'm curious to hear more about Dr. John Kelly, who you were mentioning. The nice thing about 12-step programs is the accessibility and the affordability. There's a barrier sometimes. Not everybody has access to therapy because it's cost prohibitive. If you don't have health care, for example, or quality health care, it can get expensive. The nice thing about 12-step recovery, and especially with the advent of all these extra online meetings, is, and if you have access to a computer and the internet, you can participate in several meetings, either for, I guess, free in a sense online, or, almost next to nothing. I mean, it's very, very affordable and accessible.
Well, Dr. Kelly talks about that in his presentations, that you produce a substantial reduction in healthcare costs while producing long-term benefits that clinical and therapeutic don't always produce, because the 12-step process is a never-ending cycle where you keep working your way through the steps. You got to get through to step 12, and then you're back at step 1 going through it again, and it's like the shampoo. Lather, rinse, repeat. I go through a whole bottle in the shower every time because it doesn't say stop. It says lather, rinse, repeat. And there's no stop when to stop.
Oh, maybe they should add stop.
Kind of sounds like my active addiction, too, because there are no instructions on a bottle of vodka.
Oh, jeez.
But all kidding aside.
I'm like, do they need instructions? But I'm curious about, Dr. Kelly, but then also your experience with sponsorship, because from what I understand, through our friendship and knowing you, I mean, you have a very strong relationship with your sponsor, and I'm not sure how many years that's been, but I know you have a very good relationship with your sponsor.
I've always had a sponsor in the program. In the beginning, I actually had a series of people that were like a sponsorship group before I had any one person to begin working the steps, and this all happened rather quickly in the program. But I made friends with 2 or 3 or 4 close people that I spent an enormous amount of time with that were also working a program, some of which had, not much more sobriety than myself. I mean, they might have been there a year before me or months before me, or even have dealt with relapse in between and so forth. But I always had a group of people around me that I could discuss things with, issues with, talk about problems, challenges in life, and they did the same with me, and we helped each other, and it took away all of the loneliness that addiction causes.
Yeah.
So I definitely think an accountability group is even a good idea.
Sure.
And then I chose a sponsor and worked through all 12 steps with that sponsor. I'm grateful for the process, and I get to do it again over and over and over again. That accountability over time, and I've become my current sponsor, I'm, best friends with. So this is a person I know, another guy that I know intimately what his life is all about, and he knows what mine is all about, so that you don't have to catch up on what's happening, in your life when a challenge hits.
Yeah.
If somebody knows everything about you, then you can just get right to the root of what's going on at the moment in your life, and you don't have to tell the backstory on part A and part B and part C to catch them up.
Yep.
So I have great value in sponsorship and sponsorship groups that know everything about you. They say in 12-step recovery you're supposed to pick a home group that knows you well. You know, don't just bounce from meeting to meeting and kind of being a fly on the wall.
Right.
You at least want to have one group of people that know you well enough so that they can tell when things are going good or bad, maybe even before you can.
Right.
Yeah. I want to talk for a minute about recovery coaches, because that is very different than sponsorship. When I first learned about recovery coaches, I thought, what? A paid sponsor? Because recovery coaches make money. Okay. And I'm like, how does that work? You know, 12-step work is supposed to be free. But I was quickly educated. And by the way, now I'm a certified recovery coach myself. I've gone through the certification. Basically offering non-clinical assistance to support long-term recovery on a paid basis, however that works. And I've done it for free for folks. You know, I don't charge all the time. It depends on the situation. But that's irrelevant. The money part of it is a job, though. That's what I wanted to make clear. It's a job. It's a person that connects you with resources.
Yeah.
So you might get connected to a 12-step program, or connected to a sponsor, or connected to housing, or connected to some place that if you need a sofa for your living room, you can get furniture, or get connected to counseling. All of these different life aspects that make for long-term sustained recovery. Recovery coaches get involved in that. Now, when I've coached people, I also am the conduit, a communication center for that person's recovery. That is an overstep, if you will, what the typical recovery coach does. What I mean by that is, like, I can tell if somebody's lying to their therapist, you know, and then I'm intervening with the family, perhaps, and trying to help the family understand what's happening. And maybe I'm trying to get this person in treatment, and, you know, they have a significant other involved, or whatever, all these things. And oftentimes people in active addiction don't always tell the truth. No. They don't always tell the whole story. And I am the one who's like the priest in the confessional booth that knows everything. And I'll say, this person is lying to you about this. I know this person drank the other day, and they're telling you they didn't drink, you know, or whatever the case may be, so that the person can actually get long-term treatment. And then, of course, there is the circle of trust where somebody says, I'm telling you this, but I don't want you to tell my family, or I don't want you to tell anybody. And I will do that and respect that. But in all rights, I am the information conduit that can help that person actually get well. So that's recovery coaches. You know, they're normally a paid position, and they connect you to resources.
Yeah, and that's what I think of therapists as, ideally, like in sponsors too, right? Like, connecting someone to resources is a vital role. We can't make them utilize the resources.
Right.
But we can connect them. That's interesting. So for me, so it sounds like just sort of like a paid, it just kind of like a paid sponsor in a way, but it's a little more involved, because sponsorship, they don't tend to intervene with family stuff. At least not my experience has been that it's just that one-on-one, me and them. They don't interact with my family.
Your sponsor's there to help you get sober so that you can connect to all the other stuff. As opposed to a recovery coach, which is there to help you get sober, and I will connect you to all this stuff to help you do that. It's a different perspective, because it is not paid sponsorship.
I think the value, and I'm sure there are a lot of recovery coaches that are also in recovery. I don't know if is that a requirement?
It's a peer, It's peer support. Yeah. So you would be a person in long-term recovery yourself, or in sustained recovery. Yes. That would offer peer support. So because I think for me personally, and I'm not knocking therapy, because I've done
talk therapy for 30 plus years. For me, the power in knowing this other person understands my experience to a degree. Like that's why 12-step recovery works so well for me. And that's why I think a recovery coach could work so well, because you can have all the clinical knowledge and you can have read all the books in the world, but unless you have personally experienced what it's like to worry about your loved one dying from addiction or battling your own demons with codependency or whatever dysfunction that you've developed to, your maladaptive coping mechanisms, like it just, for me, doesn't have the value of you've lived this. So that for me brings a lot of credibility and integrity to that work. And therapists are wonderful. Like I wanted to be a therapist for years. So with sponsorship, that's why it's so important for me and works so well for me. Something else that I've heard, about sponsors is, and maybe this is just also the group, but they love you until you learn to love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I have struggled a lot with, self-worth, self-esteem throughout my life. So that to have this person like really believe in me and just see, value me and love me unconditionally has been so profound. And so suggestion and the groups that I've attended is, as far as sponsorship goes, they say, and I'm going to, men work with men and women work with women. Now that's heteronormatively speaking. And I want to, be mindful of the, multiple gender identities that exist. So perhaps if you identify as like a gay man, maybe it's okay for you to work with a woman. But, so we speak in kind of general terms in meetings. Men work with women, men work with men, women work with women. Because sometimes, especially depending on the program, that can there can be a distraction from the work if there's any sort of people bond in recovery. I mean, we're going through some intense stuff, and it is easy. That's why. You
ever heard of the treatment center romance?
Oh,
that's
yep.
And what they used to say back when somebody was falling in love out of a treatment center. Oh, I met my future ex-wife. Oh, I'm sorry. I met my future wife at the treatment center, and two sickies don't make a welly.
Yep, I've heard that one many times.
So people. I have known people in recovery that have established a strong bond with each other, and it's actually productive, and they're happy.
Yep.
But I've also known it to be an absolute train wreck, and there's really nothing written in stone about men work with men and women work with women. That came after time. Mm-hmm. It's not written in the literature itself, but is probably a good idea, because there is nothing more distracting than when you're trying to heal yourself and all these emotions are raw, including your emotions for attraction. Mm-hmm. And many of us have had poor choices in the past. Many of us have made poor choices. So is it a good idea to add an extra layer of distraction working with somebody? Now, I've seen it where a man has helped a woman or a woman has helped a man, and there is absolutely no sexual attraction or no relationship distraction at all.
Yeah.
So, it can work, but the rule of thumb is men work with men and women work with women, just to minimize the distraction of that attraction. And, of course, that would apply with what you just discussed with gender identity and so forth.
Yeah, and sexuality. So that's just something to be mindful of. Sure. And so because I know that's just a suggestion I've heard too. But then I'm like, okay, because I do identify, as a cisgender woman. So for me to work with another, woman, like that's not a distraction. I explicitly only attend SLAA women only meetings, because men will distract me. Because if there's going to be a messed up dude in there, oh my gosh.
Right.
That's just like moth to the flame. And probably less likely in an online meeting. I'm not going to be like, hey, I see you live in Ontario, but I'd like to come visit this weekend. No.
I'm bringing a U-Haul.
Yeah, I've heard that.
What does an alcoholic bring to a second date?
A U-Haul.
There you go.
Yeah, I've heard that joke.
And another one that I heard one time at a convention is, how come an Al-Anon closes their eyes during sex?
Oh, dear.
Because they can't stand to see an alcoholic having a good time.
Oh, my gosh. I resemble that statement. No, I mean, yeah.
Let me just put a disclaimer. Those are jokes.
They're jokes,
it's
people.
only humor, and we try to add humor to our podcasts.
It's a vital part of recovery, in my opinion.
But we are talking about life-saving techniques here.
Yes.
So just to remind everybody, a little disclaimer, we might joke around a bit, but the truth of the matter is people's lives depend on this.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, I want to kind of close this out with a teaser that might lead right into another podcast.
Yeah.
And that is this topic of recovery capital.
Mm-hmm. New one for me. I hadn't heard that before.
Well, it's been around for years, but they're getting better at measuring it.
Nice.
So recovery capital is a game changer. How do you measure happy? What color is happy? How do you define an improved quality of life? Those are questions that are difficult to answer. And when you're looking for grant funding, or you're looking for starting a new treatment program, or you're looking at just measuring recovery success, what do you do?
Yeah.
How do you measure that? It's difficult. As opposed to, prevention work where you're trying to get young people to not smoke cigarettes, and you've contacted 10 high schools and you've reached 10,000 kids and you've given them the information, blah blah blah. You can measure a lot of stuff in prevention, but you can't measure a lot of stuff in treatment and recovery. It becomes more and more challenging and more difficult. Recovery capital has been around for years, and it looks at different aspects of recovery. Now there's a company called Gloo, Gloo, that actually has developed a piece of software that measures recovery capital. It's called the Recovery Capital Index. And I'm giving them a shameless plug because I like their work. But what it measures is personal capital, social capital, and cultural capital. And we'll get into this more perhaps in another podcast. But if you look at a person's personal general well-being, are they taking care of themselves? I mean, I hadn't showered or shaved or cleaned myself up for weeks when I was in active addiction.
Yeah.
And, now I keep myself maintained, my health, my well-being. I try to eat right. I try to keep myself clean. Finances, all of those things that are personal capital. And then you get social capital, social support, family support. Are you leading a healthy lifestyle? Do you have access to health care? Mm-hmm. And those types of things that are measured socially, your interaction with other people. And then cultural capital, a sense of purpose in the world. We touched on this a little bit when we did From Survival to Significance, that episode. If you haven't checked out our other episodes, I'm going to throw in a plug here. Check out our other episodes on vivacityventures.com, or whatever podcast platform you're using, go back and listen to previous episodes, because a lot of this ties together. So we talked about From Survival to Significance, and a lot of this has to do with building capital. And cultural capital is, when you get to a significant point in your life where you've got a sense of community and a sense of purpose, and your spiritual being is thriving. So all of these can be measured, Jillian.
Wow.
Pretty amazing
nice.
Stuff.
Yeah.
And it's real easy to do on an app. I mean, almost everybody has a phone these days. Mm-hmm. Pretty much everyone has a phone.
A handheld computer.
A handheld computer. There are people that are unhoused, but they have a phone. It's just, so that everybody can measure their improved quality of life. Maybe you went from being unhoused to now you have a stable home environment. Mm-hmm. What a blessing, right? Yeah. Isn't that great? So now you can record that, and we can track it. And the reason we want to do this is so that people will support us. Mm-hmm. We can get financial support. We can get program support. We can get treatment support. All of these things that are, outcome reliant on. Well, now we have a way to measure that outcome.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty cool thing, and I think we're going to do a whole episode on recovery capital
Nice. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it because what is it? What's that term? That's so. Oh, evidence-based? I don't know.
Evidence-based
research, right? Or just, because you want something tangible, especially like you want to be able to present the data, especially if you're looking for funding, right?
Yeah, they are all the data, or all the funding people are data-oriented, and they want to see outcomes.
Yep.
They want to see some outcome. They don't want to just throw money into the wind and hope for the best.
Yeah.
So now we can actually measure happiness and contentment. We've got measurements of it. That
Nice.
Your life is rebuilt one building block at a time. Awesome. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that's super cool. Thank you for the teaser on that. I look forward to delving into that.
So if you don't have a sponsor, an accountability partner, if you're a person who wants to get into recovery, you're recovery curious, you've got things that are troubling you in life, having an accountability partner, a sponsor, or get a recovery coach. There's agencies out there that'll connect you with recovery coaches. Jillian, I'm sure you'll put
in the
some resources.
Yes. Yep.
We try to provide solutions to people. We don't just, talk ourselves into a circle. Well, sometimes we might, but but we certainly try to provide resources and solutions so that you can direct yourself or a family member to where they need to go. So check out our resources section. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, do so, please, so that you can check in with us on future episodes. And Jillian, thanks for being on this episode of the Recovery Rebirth podcast.
Thanks for continuing to invite me back, and thank you for listening, listeners.
Have a great one. We'll talk to you next time.
Take care.